In a world where entertainment is viewed as mindless diversion, only good for momentary distraction, one podcast has taken a stand, thoughtfully engaging the art of our day, dissecting the narrative, and pointing the people back to the greatest storyteller of all. You are about to enter a new world, and you will never view entertainment in the same way again. This is Popcorn Theology.
Welcome, movie lovers, theology nerds, and webheads to episode 161 of Popcorn Theology. I'm Richard.
I'm David.
And I'm James.
And we're here to have a deeper look into the multiverse with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
So we're kind of late to the game, aren't we, guys?
Yeah, when did this come out? I know it's been a while.
A while ago. It came out a whole year ago, guys.
It came out last year.
Yeah.
That's not how time works.
Okay.
Yeah. It came out basically 6 weeks before we're getting around to it.
All right, so what took us so long?
Me? I don't know. Was it just me?
I mean, it was me too. It's just, there's been so much going on and there's just been so much out there. And I will say, when I first saw advertisements for this one, I was like, that might be cool. The animation looks neat, but I didn't expect it to be an incredible story or anything. For some reason, that was just the impression I got from some of the advertisements. Like, cool animation, not sure there'll be much else there. But, you know, I intended to watch it at some point or another. We finally got around to seeing it last week, and I'm glad we did.
David, you're the Spider-Man guy, right? I mean...
I mean, I'd like to say that I am, but I like to say a lot of things. So it's... Again, it was just kind of a timing thing, unfortunately. But no, I mean, I really greatly enjoyed it once I actually got around to seeing it a couple days ago. And I'm kicking myself really hard for not seeing it sooner so I could have multiple viewings before doing this episode.
I have a confession to make. I will confess.
You're Peter Parker.
You pirated this movie, didn't you?
All right. Boy, we went two total different directions there. That was good. That was good.
I think I disliked nearly everything about what I saw for this movie. Like you said, the trailer didn't interest you, Richard. I was actually kind of further than that.
Ooh.
And that's not really about the movie itself so much. As a big comics fan for many years. Okay, I did like Spider-Ham. Spider-Ham was a hilarious parody from, I think, like the 80s or 90s in the comics. I remember reading some issues back then. So like Spider-Ham didn't bother me, but honestly, like where the Spider-Man mythos has gone in comics has not really excited me of late. Now, I'm not against Miles Morales on principle because I know that character appeared in an alternate universe, but in the comics they've brought him into the normal universe. So now, like in the same Marvel universe, we have just hanging out all the time. We have like a Spider-Man comic that's Peter, a Spider-Man comic that's Miles, Spider-Gwen, which makes no sense. Why would you put Spider-Gwen? Why would you put your name in your Spider-Man name? It just doesn't.
That's not how anonymity works.
Which they changed for the movie. So what's funny is all the various pieces that went into the Spider-Verse were things in the comic. A lot of things in the comics I didn't like. And what I loved about Into the Spider-Verse was, as happens in comics many times, comics will go off the rails. A bunch of people will do a bunch of dumb ideas. And then a new writer will come along and take all those ingredients and cook up something that's really amazing. And I think Lord and Miller, in coming up with this, working with Sony and this feature, they've taken a bunch of things that I wasn't beholden to in the comics and made me love them in the product that came out. So for me, it's almost a little story of redemption of a bunch of narrative stuff I didn't like in the comics that they've made something great of in the movie. So I was very impressed. So I think we're all on that page, right? I mean, we all liked it.
I think it took itself exactly as seriously as it needed to with regard to some of these characters. I mean, it doesn't try and convince us that they're all very serious, compelling, involved characters. I mean, it plays with the tropes in just about all of them. I mean, it's not really a spoiler, but I really liked the noir Spider-Man sort of commentary. It was just amazing.
Yeah, come on, man. He was really serious.
Sometimes I let matches burn down to my fingertips just to feel something. And John Mulaney as Spider-Ham. If you guys didn't know, that's John Mulaney, and he's hysterical. So anyway, that was fantastic as well.
Yeah, I liked it a lot, and I'll say, I've said many times on this podcast, I'm not really a comic book person in general. So James, you talking about it, it sounds like this is one of those weird situations where before you saw it, the advertisement made it seem to you like it was going to be very faithful to the comics. And in this situation, that was not necessarily a good thing. In your mind, looking forward to it, you thought that might be a bad thing this time.
Well, not even so much faithful. I mean, I knew they were obviously boiling everything together, but just as storylines about all these different versions of Spider-Man have bubbled out over various years, and even in animation styles, like there are so many different animation styles in comics these days. I mean, what's representative in the film, I've heard some people say like, oh, it's so comic book. It's like, well, it's one style of comic book. It's not even the Spider-Man art style that I grew up with or really loved. I loved an artist. It's representative of some very like aughts, like 2000s art styles, with sort of the way the Kingpin is so massively oversized beyond belief, and everything's kind of hyper distorted, which like that's a comic book style that exists, but like I've always preferred Spidey with more of I'm a John Romita fan. Comics nerds will know what I'm talking about. Steve Ditko is the original artist, and there was some little homages to some of his art style here and there, but so I've liked a more realistic style. So like it kind of had all the odds stacked against it. I was looking at it thinking, this is all the stuff about Spider-Man when I've stopped reading the comic over the years, or kind of given it up for a while. This isn't going to be the stuff I like. But you know, in the hands of the right storyteller, anything can happen. So it was great.
I was going to say I was definitely off put by Kingpin's animation. It was, and not just because we got the perfect Kingpin delivered to us in the Daredevil season.
Although that's got to be a factor. I feel like it would be hard to live up to that no matter what they did.
No, absolutely.
Except for getting him to do it and modeling it after him. Yeah.
Which could have happened. I mean,
it
multiverse, I don't know.
It could have. You're right.
They probably don't have the rights to that voice with that character.
Video footage of him. Maybe the only live action in the movie.
Put some live action characters in there too, along with all the other animation styles. That'd be good.
Well, there's been a lot of talk too. I know some people have said it is their like the best Spider-Man movie yet made, which then even people are saying it trumps the live action stuff. I where are you guys at with that? I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I don't want to take away from that. I'm not sure that I thought it was better than the Tom Holland Homecoming, nor did I think it was better than. I mean, I'm a big fan of Spider-Man 2, so I think I'm not sure it ranks somewhere in the middle of great Spider-Man stories, and I mean, in fact, I even love that it trashed Spider-Man 3's emo Parker dance.
Yes, we don't really talk about this
right out the gate. It went right into that. I was like, oh my!
So I think it falls right in the happy middle for me. I don't know about you guys.
I think I agree. I mean, it's so different though from all of the other Spider-Man movies. So like, I definitely couldn't rank it above my current favorite, I think, which is actually Spider-Man Homecoming. But I really liked what it did. I liked that it continued the universe that we got with these characters and with these comics, but it didn't make it, I don't know. I guess I didn't really feel the need to rank this one compared to the other ones, the way I have with all the other Spider-Man movies as they came out. This felt very much like its own thing. This is just set way in the future, after, Peter Parker and MJ and everything like that. So it's just set way down the road. So I don't know. I guess for me, I didn't feel the need to do that, but I love that they played with the story. And I especially liked, mild spoilers, I guess, that we didn't have to watch Uncle Ben die again, because I really didn't need another Peter Parker origin story, although we got a couple, but you know what I mean.
I say you got like 5 or 6 Peter Parker origin stories, but they were quick.
Yeah.
They were quick. Yeah, I liked it a lot. I'm having a hard time placing it, and it almost feels like it's such a different thing, because kind of like you alluded to, it's a continuation of, in a sense, these ones that we do remember and like it seems like it's directly acknowledging Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 and those sorts of things. So it's almost like, you have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and then there's John over there. And he's just out there a little bit. It's just a little bit different than the other, than the synoptic. So that's a weird comparison, but that's how I feel about it. Like
the Gospel of Spider-Man.
It's just a little bit different from the rest, such that it's hard for me to consider where does it fall? My favorite up till now has still been Spider-Man 2, special place in my heart with that movie. I had a lot of fun with this one, so I don't know. And I really loved, you guys were saying which ones you kind of liked the most, Jake Johnson as the older, kind of down on his luck Spider-Man, like won this for me. That was probably my favorite rendition of Spider-Man in this. It was awesome. And I thought, I really only know him for New Girl. I'm sure he's in other stuff.
Jurassic World, but
yeah, I know he was in that. Yeah, but I thought he was the perfect choice, and he nailed that. So I feel like I need more time. Give me more time, and then I will share with you guys.
We had 6 weeks, Richard.
Let's wait for Far From Home to come out, and by then maybe I'll know where it falls.
I was going to say the trailer for Far From Home is up there, and Mysterio, man, I can't wait. I'm very excited.
Well, part of the problem, I think, is that part of the problem, which isn't a bad problem, maybe it's not a problem at all, is that this introduces the idea of the multiverse, and so you don't have to rank so much as just acknowledge and enjoy that there are multiple versions of this character, which is, even within the context of the narrative, it does that, but it allows us sort of a new way to look at it. And I mean, maybe that's getting deeper, so maybe we want to drop the ads, but we should, I do want to talk about the multiverse and why we like that probably when we come back.
Yeah, man.
Hey everyone, I'm Aaron.
And I'm Patrick.
And together we host the Feel and Film podcast, a show that focuses more on the emotional takeaway from a movie experience rather than its technical merit.
Yes, sir. Talking about what we love about film and focusing less on the critical side of things makes for a very entertaining and enjoyable discussion.
New episodes drop every Monday morning, and you can catch them on iTunes, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and many other podcasting networks.
You can also find out more about the show at feelandfilm.com.
In the meantime, as we say on the show, stay positive
and keep feeling film.
All right, let's do this one last time. Yeah, for real this time. This is it. My name is Richard Foltz. I have been engaging media from a mindful perspective for almost 4 years now, and we're the one and only Popcorn Theology podcast. I'm pretty sure you know the rest, right? I reviewed a bunch of movies, got some co-hosts, explored the spiritual themes, and then I explored them again and again and again. And when I feel alone, like no one understands what I'm going through, I remember my friends who get it. I never thought I'd be able to do any of this stuff, but I can. Anyone can. You're not a mindless consumer. If you didn't know that before, I hope you do now, because this is Popcorn Theology, and we're not the only ones. Not by a long shot.
All right, and we're back, about to dive deeper into the Spider-Verse. And so this movie deals with the multiverse, maybe for the first time, really overtly in any films. Is that the case that you can think of, James? I know that the shows have done that, especially the DC shows have explored multiverses, but I don't think any of the Marvel stories have really gotten into the idea of a multiverse, right?
The MCU hasn't given us that yet, although, I mean, who knows what Endgame and Infinity War and all that stuff is going to do to sort of reset things. Maybe we'll get a glimpse into the multiverse. I don't know, but maybe that's how they'll bring the mutants in. I have no idea how or what Disney's going to do, but it's very much, I was thinking about it, in Star Trek and some things we've had sort of the mirror universe or sort of an alternate universe or an alternate timeline. Back to the Future, you had sort of the dark 1984. But the multiverse, to my knowledge, and maybe I'm just too much in a comic book bubble, has been a largely huge comic book institution for a long time. I mean, whether it's the multiverse in both DC and Marvel Comics, the idea that there are multiple incarnations of these superheroes with variations based on a lot of things has kind of been a big deal. Marvel used to have a comic called What If? And it was always this idea of, what if this slight tweak had happened to a story and a different avenue for either the character's origin or like a major storyline that happened differently. Like, what if this character didn't, what if the girlfriend didn't die, or what if Uncle Ben didn't die? Like it was always this idea of exploring an alternate reality. So I don't know if multiverse, it's sort of a new concept being dropped on the maybe the main public consciousness. I don't know, but it's something I've always floated in for years and years in being a comic book nerd.
Yeah, no, it's certainly not, it's not new, but as far as, the person who maybe their only exposure is from the films, it might be new. I know though that, and you might actually be able to answer this, was the idea of the multiverse kind of initially introduced, I don't say retcon, but as an attempt to have different writers explore stories differently and then kind of try and tie it together neatly in the end and just say like, oh, well, this is how we're going with it. But
well, to my knowledge, DC was kind of the first to do it because they realized, well, wait a minute, how can we have Lois Lane in stories with Superman when they covered World War II events as a reporter. So how can they be in the 90s? It was just that, how do we do this? It was almost a plot idea to sort of, well, let's introduce there's a multiverse so we can then have, Clark Kent crash in Kansas in the 1980s instead of trying to explain why he still looks like he's 35 and he's been around since World War II. So it sort of gave comics an idea to do that. Marvel was always reluctant to do that. They didn't reset their times. They tried to keep sort of a loose idea. So then they brought in this other, like, well, what if there are just parallel universes where there are different characters you can enjoy? Instead of hitting the reset reboot, what if we just acknowledge parallels? So Marvel's been more about that than DC. And yeah, it's a way to deal with that continuity problem. Like, how come Peter Parker is making jokes about Nixon? And that's doesn't make sense.
Well, I do remember as well that in the 90s series, The Amazing Spider-Man, I believe it was the series finale, actually invokes the multiverse with different Spider-Man characters.
I remember that.
Yeah, and I don't think that they even named them all as far as like, oh, this is so-and-so. And there was certainly no Spider-Ham or anything like that. It was just kind of different suits and different iterations like that. And then one of the characters, I remember really liking this a lot, that one of the Spider-Mans was the actor from our world, and he takes him to go meet Stan Lee, and he gives Stan Lee a ride, and it's like he met his creator type thing, and then that's the end of the show. I mean, it was kind of perfect. It was kind of awesome, but that was my main, I guess, first exposure to it in the show.
Yeah, I was thinking about, before we get to Miles, Miles Morales is really the key character in the movie, but they introduce us first to the idea of multiple Peters, which I think is more, when you generally think of different versions of a character, you first think of something different happened, right? You got blonde Peter, who seems to have the world on a silver platter until he dies, and then and then you've got Peter B. Parker, who's a little paunchy and lost Mary Jane, and so you have these, and then of course in Gwen's universe you understand like he died, so like you see all these variations of Peter, and I'm like, why it's not relegated to Spider-Man. There's sort of the idea of a multiverse where characters make different choices and either wind up, good, bad, indifferent, or just different. This seems to be an exciting idea to a lot of people. I guess I'm wondering if you guys, like, is there a deeper reason why?
Probably. Determining.
There's always a deeper reason.
Yeah, determining what that is might be a little bit difficult. I mean, it might be easy for us to think one of the big reasons why that would resonate with us is just this idea of, I've made mistakes, but somewhere someone like me made the right choices and they've got things together. And I don't know why that would even be comforting to know that there's another version of you enjoying all the things you missed out on because you were dumb. I'm not sure why that is such a attractive thing, but I think that is definitely a part of it. Like there's this idea, I think there's this idea of autonomy in it too. Like we want to think that if we got the right decisions made, we could make our life drastically better. And it almost feels to me like this, and this sounds judgmental, so I don't want to act like anyone who enjoys the multiverse feels this way, but that it could be this discontentedness with the reality we found ourselves in, sort of like Peter B. Parker finds himself kind of discontent with what he's been given. And it's interesting the way the movie plays it, because it kind of gives him ammunition to go back and try to work on the life that he had, as opposed to just wallowing in it as he had been. But there is this idea of things have just went drastically wrong, but man, if I would have made the right choices, it could be different.
Yeah, I think, it takes a lot of different forms. I mean, to some it might be the Uncle Rico, don't you just wish you could go back in time and do things differently? But also, I don't know. I've thought a fair bit about, well, what if I had been born in, what if I hadn't been born in America? Which I guess I wasn't technically born here, but my parents are from here. So what if I hadn't been born to American parents? Or what if I hadn't been born to parents who were believers? What if I hadn't been, put in this time in history? Or even, I like to play this mental game of like, if you could choose what year you were born in, what would it be? If you could, knowing everything about the past, 100 years, anything during that time, what year would you choose your birth to have been in? Not that you can, of course, but I think there's something fascinating about what would I have done in different situations? How would I have reacted differently? And maybe some comfort to that, but at the very least, a lot of curiosity, at least on my part, as far as how things would have played out differently. Or even just looking back on major life choices of yours and saying, man, what if that relationship hadn't ended the way that it did? Or what if it, what if I didn't go to that school? What if I did go to that other school? And, something along those lines really drives a lot of maybe regret or maybe appreciation for the way that the Lord has worked our paths. I don't think that it's in and of itself a harmful thing, but if it can become an idol and keep us from being content in Christ, then it certainly could become that.
I like that. There's two pieces there, right? There's a perhaps comfort, which may or may not be good, but then there's also self-reflection, like you're talking about, that could be healthy. Like, I can think if I was born in this different place, different time, would I, do I need some humility in regard to how the way I judge other people who may be in those circumstances? And like there's a humility and self-reflection that can come from that, I think, totally. And it works both ways, right? I can think somewhere out there's a better incarnation of me. I could also think, wow, like if I'd made other choices, I could be in a worse place. So I can find a balance in there that is healthy. Like you were talking about, Richard, it's like I don't want to speak ill of the idea of a multiverse, but part of me was, as you're talking, it's like, well, wait, in other religions like Hinduism, like the idea, like, well, I'm going to have another incarnation, I can do it better. I can make better choices the next time around. Yeah. Like there's an idea of incarnation and doing things better that the multiverse doesn't replicate, but I wonder if it offers us some of the same. Like there could be a trap of comfort there that I don't want. I don't want to imagine, well, I'm better than other versions of me that could have been and feel fine. And I think we see Peter B. Parker look at this other Peter that's passed away and look at the Mary Jane that's still there in this movie. Like there's something aspirational that comes from that's positive, right? He's like, wait, I could be better. I don't need to be this version of myself that I am today. Like I could aspire to something that is alternate and better, in a way that is positive. So I think it could be both. I think it could be an odd trap that I think maybe touches on other religions I wouldn't agree with, but I think it also has it has an aspirational aspect that I think could be helpful, or at least a perspective balance.
It's interesting, the arc that Peter B. Parker takes, because like you said, he winds up in this place where he's given this aspiration to go back and make things work because he saw how it could work, but he doesn't start there, right? I mean, he basically starts breaking the 10th commandment about himself. like he's coveting the now deceased Peter Parker, but because of how good his life was up until that point, and realizing that his had gone so miserably. And so I think the movie does do a pretty good job of showing you both how this idea could be a positive thing to consider or a negative thing to consider. The results of your choices, thinking on that, could lead you to discontentedness, or it could lead you to aspirations or gratefulness. And I think that's that old adage of when you bump the glass of water and water comes out, it's because the water's there. I don't think, it's whether you wind up being discontent or grateful based on considering where your choices brought you is largely based on what's inside of you to begin with. So I don't know that this thing is necessarily a danger unless you're just the sort of person that already has discontentedness, and this is revealing that. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's a mirror, and it's going to help you to consider things, and if it takes you to a place where you're coveting another you that could have been, then it did you a favor. It revealed something to you could consider and work on. So really, you're winning either way.
It's only a danger if your spider sense is tingling.
Right.
Then you know. Or if you suddenly become invisible, which is what happens with Miles, right? So that's your reflex.
That's just puberty, though. So.
But that's where really the movie at its heart is about Miles. So we should jump into the middle and the meat, and the main point that we want to hit is talking about Miles Morales, right?
Yeah, I have a quick bone to pick. His last name is Morales, which is his mother's last name. I'm just throwing that out there.
Why is that? Is there some reason, James, you might know, is there some reason why that is?
Ooh. No.
Father's name is not.
His last name is Davis.
Or the dad in the house is not.
Which would make his name Miles Davis, which is awesome. Not that Miles Morales isn't awesome.
Maybe that's
It's
why
just,
they went with Morales. He just didn't want to get picked on.
It's just confusing. I guess because they had to have the uncle tie to the dad, and the uncle was a known character who had a last name that was already set. Is that possible?
I don't know.
And the dad wasn't exactly an established I don't know. Maybe he was too.
Maybe not the biological father? Honestly, that's something I
Well,
don't
that's
know
possible.
about from the comics.
I didn't think about that, but yeah, I don't know. That was, again, I never heard of people doing that, like where the mother is the last of the family line, or there's no son to carry on the family name, and so they'll give the mother's last name to the child instead of the father's if the father agrees to it or whatever. I've heard of it happening. It was just, and maybe I'm expecting too much exposition from this movie, but I was just like, wait, you've established that the dad's last name is not Morales because his full brother's last name is Davis. I'm so confused. Anyway, that is my only beef. I'm good. I'm good with all of the everything else that happened.
Well, I think, Richard, you brought out something earlier before we jumped into the podcast about why you like Miles or what he kind of represents in regard to Spider-Man and the mythos.
Yeah, and so maybe to bridge from the last thing we were talking about with the multiverses and into this concept of talking about Miles and his story in this film in particular. One, when we're talking about those multiverses, and maybe, James, maybe you know, or maybe this is something that's been speculated on, why are there so many of the same hero across all these different universes? Like, why? Is there some reason why?
Because Sony owns the rights to all of them.
Okay, well, then that's fair. But that is fair. But I mean,
and the headphones with the product placement.
It's not like it's the same person in every universe, because there's the anime
Penny,
Penny, and there's Nicolas Cage's Peter Parker's a little bit different, and I don't know if his name was even Peter Parker into that. I'm not sure. But there's this idea of Spider-Man showing up in all these different universes as though there's some sort of template or ideal that is being aspired to somehow subconscious. I don't know, and I just didn't know if there was some reason for that stated somewhere, or if it's just accepted that in every possible universe a Spider-Man's going to crop up, maybe a few. Like I don't know, but I just thought that was really interesting that it toys with that idea, like that there is this plan to things almost, like even though the details might be different, that the basic beats of this character are going to exist no matter where you go.
And it's along that same line, the fact that we have Miles become Spider-Man literally the day before the other Spider-Man gets taken out of the picture, the original Spider-Man gets taken out of the picture. It certainly seems
planned.
Yeah. It seems very planned, almost as if it was written.
Right.
Some writers have played with the idea of destiny and the idea that this totemistic. I've actually read a couple of writers that have tried to talk about like it's this totemistic mythic thing that must always have a manifestation. So they have occasionally toyed with this. Wasn't just a mistake of one radioactive spider, that there is sort of this cosmic destiny to it, that this and other types of heroes must always emerge. I do think, as David alluded to, that's also Marvel Comics realizing, hey, we can milk this thing. Part of the reason I was never a big fan of all the different pieces was it did seem like, well, let's just, how many Spider-Man comics can we make that sort of play off all of these themes to make money? Which is why I think I was initially not that excited about all the different versions. This movie sort of took what was probably done out of, less than noble narrative intentions and coalesced it into something that actually has heart, which is actually what kind of makes it good.
And I think as well, if we're talking about the sort of destiny aspect of it, that brings another sort of side thing to mind, which is that, people have really given The Last Jedi, Force Awakens a really hard time because of Rey's character being a Mary Sue. That, she's just too good at using the Force and at this and that. She's too good for what her character is. I haven't heard a similar blowback to Miles immediately becoming an amazing Spider-Man within like 15 minutes.
Come on, dude. It was at least like 3 days, right? I mean, that was a lot of intense training.
No. The dad holding, or not the dad, but the other Peter Parker holding him, and then like it was just that evening that he was, as far as how much time passed, it was really just later that same day that he was like saving his life. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there that Miles Morales is a Mary Sue. That's the extent of my point there.
I don't know that, but they went out of their way to show him struggle and not know how to use his abilities.
This
and
is
stuff,
true, but
which
they don't
never do.
We didn't get a montage.
I'm not one that argues
montage.
against Ray, but if we're making that comparison, like I don't feel like you ever see Ray struggle with something.
That's fair.
Whereas even though it's quick succession, you do see. We're getting way off topic a little bit, but
sorry. Well, the destiny is where I was going with that. Is that maybe it's because, as has been speculated with Ray, that there's something about balance in the Force that requires a strong Force user, and so it's simply just kind of built into her. And maybe there's something with Miles that kind of answers that as well. I promise there was a tie-in, but
I know in my life, if I totally don't know how to do something, it takes me like one struggling 36-hour period to figure it out, and then I'm totally golden. Like
usually with the musical montage over it.
Swing through the forest with literally no instruction except just go for it from Peter B. And suddenly you become a good web slinger like the next day. But no, I mean like that's the conceit with some of these things that they are almost like fairy tales, and I just roll with it because it's like that. Because you could have had a montage and had him training him over weeks or something, and I might have preferred that. It didn't ruin the experience for me. I do prefer montages that let us know a little time has passed. I think about another. I've heard that this movie has actually inspired DC to consider rolling out a whole new Batman Beyond animated feature, which is a storyline where Bruce Wayne has a protege. So you kind of have the protege and the young kid, and I love the idea that takes place over time. This movie didn't go there, but I would have preferred it, but I still enjoyed it. So not that big of a deal.
So circling back around, James, you were asking me to talk about something, and I went a completely other direction. But I think it is connected when we're talking about this idea that Spider-Man just kind of crops up in all these different universes, as though there's some purpose to it, as though there's some template to it, and they're all trying to live up to this ideal of what Spider-Man can be to varying degrees of success. And then you have the main character of this story in Miles, who really the whole thing is his story of stepping into the shoes of Spider-Man, stepping into the shoes of the now deceased Peter Parker, and becoming this new Spider-Man. And so for me, the big arc of this story, the main thing that's going on is this imitation of someone that went before you, and aspiring to be like them, which is a very important thing for Christians to consider doing, because we're called not only to imitate Christ, but even Paul says, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Like there's even on this earth, we can have mentors and people that we look up to that are worthy of imitation. And I think it's important for us to find people like that, and also very important for us to discern who those people are. I think sometimes we might misplace that role, but I love that aspect of the story, that and to me, that's why when you said he's kind of a Mary Sue, to me, the most interesting part of the story was him struggling to become Peter Parker, even if it happened quickly, or to become Spider-Man, not Peter Parker. But even though that happened quickly, that was the most interesting part to me, was the struggle and the striving to be like the teacher, having gotten very little instruction, really.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I didn't mean to make it sound like he didn't have struggled to get to that point. It's just that like it was struggle, amazing. It wasn't like struggle, progress,
and
progress,
it was.
amazing.
You're right, it was.
But no, I completely agree that, and you mentioned discernment as far as knowing who to emulate. I mean, we saw that even with Miles, he was placing it in the wrong person. He was placing it in his Uncle Aaron. Seemed like a good guy. Seemed like a stand-up guy. But there was something that I guess the dad either knew about, which I'd be curious. The dad didn't look all that surprised to see him in that suit. I wonder if the dad knew the whole time. That would be pretty interesting. But regardless, he's not who Miles thought he was, and he had placed trust in him that was misplaced. Ultimately, for Aaron to sort of redeem himself in the end, a bit. But so yeah, it kind of shows almost a cautionary tale of placing your hope in the wrong person.
Just the idea of Christian, people like just meaning little Christ. It's like, all right, so yeah, Miles Morales kind of wants to be a Spider-Manian. I don't know, like that's. Even in the picture, he looks like a very small version in a cheaper costume of the original Spider-Man for much of the movie until he gets his own cool black and red suit. But
Yeah.
and you're not wrong when you're talking about it. I forgot about really comparing the uncle. I was thinking about both his interactions with his uncle and then Peter B., who's flawed too. I was thinking about Luke chapter 6. Jesus says the disciple's not above his teacher, but everyone, when he's fully trained, will be like his teacher. Which could, like, you could read that different ways. You just be like, a disciple's not above his teacher, but when I'm trained, I'll be like my teacher. Yay. But actually, in Luke 6, Jesus starts that. The verse before says, can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they both not fall into a pit? And, in this story, we see there's sort of an idyllic Peter, that's, Blondie. And then there's this, Peter B needs help too. There's a little bit of blind leading the blind. And in fact, interacting with Miles and seeing this different world actually gives him pieces. Like, he needs to do as much learning and learning what he needs to imitate as well. So that when we talk about, imitating Paul or imitating human people as Christians, it's like, all right, there's a little reciprocity there. Like there's a nature where I can learn from somebody, but they're not perfect. In fact, that relationship might even, the teacher might learn something from the student in that case. We don't, Jesus doesn't learn any big life lessons from us, but Jesus didn't need to learn anything from us. But in every other relationship, teacher to student, it's a little more like Peter B. and Miles Morales. Like both are looking to something to ultimately be that template, which you alluded to earlier. And it's like this movie kind of assumes there's some template out there that is what we should be or what we should be linked to. I think the only place the movie kind of alludes to it there is when we get the Stan Lee cameo, right? That Stan Lee says, the person who helps others simply because it should or must be done and because it is the right thing to do is indeed without a doubt a real superhero. That's like, I love that statement. I kind of fall back on that old age-old question. Like, that sounds fantastic, but what are we standing on? What foundation are we standing on? What standard? But it is a statement, I think, that pulls at our hearts, and we have to ask ourselves, why do we have that element of conscience which doesn't come out of any logical, materialistic view of the universe? Like, there's something deeper there. There's something destined or something built in that isn't a radioactive spider.
I think, James, what you were speaking to there with that relationship having some reciprocity to it, I think anyone that has kids gets that to some degree. Like, there's no one that has kids that are growing up that doesn't learn countless things from them. There is this defined, the parent and the child relationship in which it's primarily a one-way discipleship thing, but the discipler, as far as humans are concerned, usually learns from the disciple at the same time. And I love that this movie shows that so clearly. If anything, you might say Peter B. Parker learned the most of any of these people, because Miles seems to already sort of have that moral compass to a degree. He's learning practical tricks of the trade. He's learning, he might have picked that up over time, just like the original Peter Parker did, in theory. But what he gave to Peter B. Parker is something that he might not have come out of that funk had he not had someone to spur him along. So it's pretty cool. It's a pretty cool picture.
Yeah, it's interesting because the blonde Peter Parker really doesn't look like the Peter Parker of the comics or of most, we get this blonde sort of golden Peter Parker that is never what Spider-Man actually achieves in the normal comics or really in any incarnation. There's always some way, something's always still going wrong, right? And he hasn't had that sort of beautiful sacrificial death. In some way, it was weird watching the movie. It's like, actually, the Peter in the comics is usually somewhere between Golden Boy and Peter B. In fact, there's usually a Peter B problem of they've created something, and they have to, right? That's how they manufacture conflict. Something's happening where he's falling short somehow, whether it's breaking up, I think in the comics right now, he's not with Mary Jane. So there's always these problems that he has to have because they're trying to help they're trying to help the reader relate to things in their life that they want to fix. But it was interesting, this movie, although Fisk is really complex, obviously, in the Marvel Netflix stuff, which you guys talked about earlier, they actually didn't just create a one-note villain with Fisk either. Like, he's trying to fix maybe atone or solve a regret. I mean, like the whole main problem of the issue is born of tragedy, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, he's dealing with his own loss. Granted, it doesn't excuse any of his actions, but his ultimate goal for all of this destruction is that he has weighed their lives to be worth it compared to sort of assuaging his guilt and his loss. I mean, it's sort of a combination that he lost them, but he lost them because of his actions. I think that's where it gets more involved. It's not just that they uncovered, oh, he's actually evil, let's go. It's that they catch him in the act, and it's this visceral reaction, and it's worth everything in the world just to get them back. And then he, in the end, loses them again because he hasn't actually changed anything about himself. It was a good use of that character. I was really kind of confused where they were going with Kingpin there for a while, especially with the animation style. But what we see is that, you know, he's attempting to fix his own flaws, his own sins, but in the end, he does it using the same tactics that got him there in the first place. You know, using destruction and mayhem. So I don't know. Did you guys think he was sort of sympathetic in this movie?
I think every villain that's made in anything anymore is they make in some way sympathetic, and part of that bothers me sometimes. But I think they did a pretty good job with this.
You miss the days of Biff, don't you?
Yeah, I need a Biff every once in a while. I need someone that you're just a butt, and I don't know why you're here, but you just aren't great. And those are few and far between these days. But with Kingpin's character in this, I liked where they went with it. I liked that they gave him motivations beyond I'm just trying to tear crap up. They had to give him some sort of motivation for what he's doing, and I thought it was interesting they chose to give him a motivation that we can relate to some degree, having regrets and trying to make up for these past wrongs or things that we think went wrong. They could have just went with he's trying to make money or he's trying, but they went with something that we can relate to, which I think was the right choice this time.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I wonder what other viewers think of watching it, because they did have that peculiar animation style. He's blocky, he's huge, he's not very attractive. I kind of think if he looked like Tom Hiddleston, would certain people have found him more sympathetic? Right? Like you make him in certain ways unattractive, and yet you give, like, I can have sympathy for him, but yet I can clearly look and say, these actions are not justified. You are so clearly wrong. You need to stop, and you need to be stopped. And in fact, there is a price to be paid for your hurtful actions. You're not wrong, Richard. I do sometimes kind of chafe. I think the only one in the MCU we got the Red Skull. That was probably one of the few out and out he didn't have a mustache to twist on that skull face, but it's about the only one that really kind of had
to be a Nazi for us to get it, though. I mean, that's the only way we get just a straight bad person.
There was probably a conversation about that too. Should we make the Nazi sympathetic? No.
Yeah, and I think that it's a tricky line to do. I think this movie did it well. It's like, all right, I can have a measure of sympathy and understanding for where you're at, and absolutely then I'm not going to excuse, condone, or have any way of agreeing with this. So none of our protagonists can go there either. So it's helpful, I think, to draw that line if you're going to have if you're going to give a reason for people's actions, still making sure the line of excusing it is not there is super helpful. And there's a flaw there because he's trying to fix his own sins. I guess I started thinking back about an old article I read about Spider-Man. I mean, like, much of what we see about Spidey is, and one of the Marvel editors even said to him, Peter Parker was a lapsed Catholic. And that's how he wrote him, because he's basically trying to atone for this sin he can never atone for with Uncle Ben. Like, that's why he goes out. It's like, well, that's not the motivation of a Christian. Like, it's not out of guilt. It's not out of trying to achieve some kind of self-atonement. And yet that's how Peter Parker's been written by a great many writers. And it was interesting looking at how all of them Kingpin's acting out of this guilt, and I can sympathize. I can sympathize with a Peter Parker operating out of that mindset. And then you looked at, I think Gwen was operating because she thought she'd let Peter die. And everybody's sort of operating out of this guilt of having failed. And I wondered what's that tapping into? And then Miles kind of, to me, represented something different, because his uncle it is more in the category Uncle Ben is always painted like a saint, and I guess if Peter probably didn't do anything to die in Gwen's world, and it's like, wait, the uncle kind of fell prey to his own actions. And Miles' story might be trying to help steer people away from their own bad actions, but it's not trying to atone for his own mistake. It's different. It comes from almost more of a place of better virtue. I don't know. Yeah. Maybe I'm reading into it wrong.
And part of the thing with Miles, I wouldn't have really thought about this, but hearing you talk about it is making me think about it. Yes, he also loses an uncle, much like Peter Parker. But like you said, it's not from something he did. It's from his uncle's own actions. You touched on that. But then you also have the fact that he just wants to imitate Spider-Man and be a hero long before that even happens. For, I don't know, maybe because it's really cool and he thinks that's really a neat thing to do. It might be part of it. But whatever he's operating out of, at least until that happens, you can't say it's out of any sort of guilt about anything. Mm-mm. There's nothing there like that. He just realizes I have the same abilities and I could help people, and so I should. And it seems like that's his only motivation, whereas every other incarnation of Peter or Spider-Man, however you want to put that, I don't know. I mean, I guess I don't know about every other, but the ones that we saw, it seemed like there was some degree of something terrible happened because of choices I made, which is interesting in a multiverse story like this. Choices I made led to something terrible, and now I'm trying to do everything I can to make up for it. But that's not, I don't think you can say that's the case, even though Miles had a similar event take place, like the template still being filled in a way. His motivation is drastically different. I don't know that it's anything besides wanting to help people and sort of wanting to be cool. Like that might be the other part of it. I don't know what else it could. I can't see guilt as being any sort of motivation for him, and that's an interesting turn.
Yeah.
When you're having a bunch of different Spider-Men shown, and only this one seems to not fit that mold.
I mean, but he does seem to have something of a commission that he's responding to. I mean, he is given, with Peter's dying, with the first Peter, Blondie, with his dying breath, he's given you need to save this. You need to fix this. Do what you can to fix this. And so he's given a job.
He's doing it because he promised Peter Parker in the beginning. It's not out of a guilt because he didn't do anything wrong, but he's doing it out of a promise.
Yeah.
And so, boy, I haven't reached like this in a while, but are you ready for it?
Yeah.
Peter Parker is like the old covenant, the old system, giving way to the new, in which it goes from guilt and trying to atone for yourself to operating out of the gifts you've already been given and out of promise. There's actually this turn, this hinge in what's going on with him. And it's interesting because he's replacing the Peter that was. The old one is passing away. It's reaching, but I almost might have something here. But there's this turn, like you're pointing out. He's doing it. I had forgotten that part of it because he promised Peter he would.
Yeah,
and he was commissioned to do it. It's not because he has to or because he has to make up for something in the past. He's doing it because he was commissioned to do it, and he said he would, and so he's doing it, which is very different. That's cool. I like that.
I do too. I like there's a works righteousness angle to Peter Parker that isn't really as prevalent in Miles Morales. The motivation, foundation, the initiation of all of that comes from a different place, and he's seeking to imitate something. I think in some ways Miles Morales represents a better parallel to the Christian life than Peter Parker, which, being a lifelong Peter Parker fan, it's like, it's almost hard to admit. It's like, whatever. These are fictional characters. I think if you look at all the different Peters trying to atone because basically they've basically fallen. I mean, you almost have a portrait of the fallen Peter. Like, all the different Peters represent someone who let sin enter. And now you have this new sort of multi-generational cascading effect of grace. And somebody like Miles, who is imperfect, is sort of coming into this relationship and kind of being given this gift and being called to imitation. There's a cool, better gospel parallel probably to Miles than Peter. That's big. We didn't even go into that.
This is not in the notes, people. I'm looking at the notes. It's not there.
We are so far down the Spider-Verse. It's crazy. But this is why, I hope people get inspired by this type of conversation. These things aren't always born of notes and planning and making diagrams. Sometimes just good conversation with like-minded folks like yourselves, just like it generates this stuff. So I hope people get that we aren't always geniuses writing all this stuff down. Sometimes it comes from dialogue, which is what we want people to do.
I can say so many times where I thought about a flick or a show I was watching, and sometimes it's been preparation for us to record about it. And I mean, I'll think about it for weeks and be like, man, I see this, I see that. And I'll still sit down to record with, in the past, just David and now the three of us. Very free. I want to say almost every time, but I don't know for sure about that. But a lot of times something will come up in the conversation like, wow, how did I not see such a clear theme or a clear idea that I definitely should have been led to think about by this movie, and someone else called it. And I think it's a cool thing we get to do. Like, we think about iron sharpening iron when it comes to like debating what the Word of God is trying to say, or the big issues of faith and of practice in the Christian life and those sorts of things. But I think iron can really sharpen iron, even when it comes to engaging with stuff that the world's just putting out there. Like, there is a way in which we can come together and actually sharpen one another to be able to find these things and to engage with them wisely better. And I think whether you're the teacher or the student in that situation, like we said, there's reciprocity there where that happens, just by virtue of conversation. It's a really cool thing, and I think it happens even more off the air from the podcast, just normal conversations with normal people.
I think as well, like, if you ever find yourself in the situation like I do sometimes of like, well, but they won't understand. And then, people like Richard and James will be like, we might be the only ones who understand. People listening might not even understand. But yeah, no, it's, if you're looking for people who, if you're looking for that type of interaction, that type of conversation, we've got a group. It's a bit smaller than it used to be, but we still have a group. If you're at all interested, supporting us on Patreon, you become a patron saint for just $1 a month. We've got a sort of exclusive, I guess you could say, Facebook group for supporters, and the conversation in there is quite good. Lots of iron sharpening iron in there, and so yeah, you'd be more than welcome
into the popcorn theology verse.
For sure. Well, this has been fantastic, everyone. I keep wanting to say keep it going in the group. It's so sad.
I mean, you can keep it growing in the Facebook group for patrons.
If you're a patron saint,
like you said, they could join up, and it's like $1 a month. It's nothing, guys. Come on.
I'm still mourning the loss of the group. Well, in the meantime, keep engaging media from a godly worldview, and remember, you are not a mindless consumer.
This morning I woke up in the fortress.